Domenico Callegari, the Italian immigrant who planted the vineyard, his job that he had was he worked at the dump in San Francisco, and when he came to Sebastopol, he wanted to kind of, in his vision, you know, in his memory at least of his childhood, recreate this Baco Noir experience that he had in Italy. So when he first planted this vineyard, he would just bring up materials that he got from his job, from his day job at the dump. And so the original trellising system was just like old like pipes and pieces of metal and TV antennas and, you know, scraps that he would come across. And you can see that just literally in the shape of these vines, you know, of how they've moved through time and how the pruning over time has shaped them into these like weird twisty kind of Dr. Seuss, you know, looking vine architecture. He wasn't farming this commercially. He planted Baco Noir that requires no chemical sprays whatsoever, and so he could, you know, it's just an easier way to farm with less input, less materials, and less labor. And so even though sometimes the vines look really young, you know, like this one here, but in fact the root system is still like the original root system, which allows these vines to be completely dry farmed. So you get, you know, like here's like this older vine, you know, next to something new that I'm trying to retrain to fill in some of these gaps and just to get the vineyard more productive and bearing more fruit. So when you're dry farming a vineyard, filling in these gaps in the vineyard is really difficult, because the more conventional method is just, you know, is to buy younger vines, maybe you're propagating them yourself, but, you know, it's to plant this young vine in this missing hole in the vineyard, and then you got to irrigate it though, because the roots aren't established yet, and don't go very deep, and so, you know, your top 12 to 18 inches of topsoil just dries out really quickly, and so you constantly have to irrigate during the growing season to establish this young vine until it gets to a point where you can start weaning it off of water. This is a good example of, you know, how you would get a new vine to grow with using your existing established root system. So this is called layering, and so this was done, I don't know, 20 years ago, but, you know, there was a need for a vine here, and so you just take the cane and you put it into the ground and you cover it with soil during the winter, and then that node that would have been, you know, growth like this, instead of putting out shoots, puts out roots, and then but it's getting fed still from this original mother vine, and so the carbohydrates and the water from the original root system is feeding this newer shoot, and then eventually over the years, you know, the new vine becomes established and it won't need the original vine. I've just left it here because there's no reason to really cut it off if you don't need to, but so anyways, that's an old school technique for filling in these gaps in the vineyard when you don't have any irrigation. The reason I haven't just gone all in and just filled all the holes with more Baco Noir is really like my view, and also my winemaking style, is that I feel like field blends, especially with hybrids, are really the answer to a lot of people's like questions about hybrids. You know, you get these varieties like Baco Noir that has like high acidity. So like I'm picking this variety late September and 24 and a half bricks, but the TA is like over 10. So with that amount of acidity, you know, it could use something else to like blend with it to naturally lower the acidity. And I'm just a big believer in field blends, like making the blend in the vineyard and then just picking everything at once, and then it all gets co-fermented in the same tank, as opposed to like fermenting this really high acid variety on its own and then going in later and trying to like tweak it from some other variety. I would much rather just plant some lower acid varieties in the vineyard and then just naturally just make this more cohesive, balanced wine. And so that's what I'm doing, is basically trying to figure out what those varieties are. So there are some younger vines in the gaps in the vineyard that are these white varieties, these lower acid white varieties like Aromella and Brianna, that are gonna, really the goal is to like pop the aromatics. I don't need color. Baco Noir it's not quite a Tintoria grape, but it has intense color. So that's a non-issue. So really it's all about just trying to plant some more like flabbier, lower acid aromatic whites to kind of just to create this Baco Noir based field blend. So eventually, so there's little spots of it here. So I was gonna do a row of vines here. I was gonna expand the vineyard a little bit and do another row here, but I changed my mind. So you can still see the T-posts. And then I had this realization of, so there's all this meadow foam that you can start to see popping up. And eventually, it's just now starting, but in a couple of weeks, this whole area will be covered in these little teeny tiny white flowers. And it's a really unique, special, and endemic flower that only grows in these vernal pools. And you get, so in a couple of weeks when all these flowers are blooming and the weather's warmer, you're gonna get, there's all these bees. They're these little teeny tiny, I don't remember exactly the name of them, but they're so specialized that they only are attracted and want the pollen from these particular flowers. So if these flowers are not here, then all these bees are gone here, because they've just over time have evolved to have this really symbiotic relationship with these flowers. And so because of that, I decided not to plant anything in here, just to preserve, even though I'm not using any sprays or chemicals or anything, just to minimize traffic and you know, mowing and stuff in this in between these two vine rows.